listeners, if you're feeling that you're struggling with this, you're a Christian, but you don't feel like your relationship with God is really that deep, it's not a new problem. This is not a modern day thing. In fact, in the Bible, isn't it Paul that says, or is it Peter, that I'd like to be giving you solid food, but you still are only able to have
Actually,
milk?
that is in the book of Hebrews, I believe.
Is it?
Which no one knows who wrote it.
I'm going to say Barnabas.
You just hop on the Barnabas bandwagon.
So anyways, whoever said it.
You're only saying Barnabas because you want to be different.
Whoever said that phrase, what they're getting at is, I want to be giving you something deeper.
Yes.
But you're still being a baby Christian.
Yeah.
You can't handle solid food. I'm going to have to keep giving you milk.
Yes.
And so if you're right now struggling with this, don't fear. The Life Report is here to help you.
Yes. That's why what we do.
Just like the early apostles.
Yeah.
Ben and I can...
I'm like Paul. And you're like Paul's assistant that didn't make it into the Bible.
Very nice. Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome.
So, no, but at the end of this episode, we're going to have some tips and go a little bit deeper on how you can get more spiritually mature.
Yes.
But before then, should we go on to our next topic?
We are basing this whole thing on a book that you've read and I haven't, The Radical Disciple by John Stott. So we thought, let's actually tie it into the book a little bit.
Let's tie it in just a little bit. Let's talk briefly about some of his 5 points.
You take it away, and I am going to respond to you live.
That is what we should do. I will read each of the 5 points and then stop and you talk.
I am prepping my brain. Wait. 5 points. 5 points?
Oh, no.
5 points, and I'm going to respond to them. That can only mean that it's time for... And now, the Bendy Bono countdown on the Life Report. And the Matt Anderson countdown, since we're doing it together. Number 5.
Number 5. John Stott talked about we must be like Jesus. We must be like Christ in his incarnation.
Tell me what he means by this.
This seems odd. I mean, that's a weird thing to say because obviously we're not God and we cannot be incarnated as humans, for we are humans. And we can't be incarnated as gods because we're not Mormon. So,
you're not.
Wait, what?
Wait. No, I'm not either.
Yeah, so he even addressed that. He said some people might recoil in horror from this idea. But what he's getting at is actually it ties into Philippians.
So you're talking about us not being gods?
Yeah.
I just have this thought for you.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
Thank you.
Thank you, C-3PO.
So,
he's not a Mormon either.
Okay, good. Yes, so back to incarnation. Ben, thank you for...
good plan.
Yeah. So he says, surely you may say the incarnation was an altogether unique event and it cannot be imitated.
Yes.
True, right? Well, he says the answer is yes and no. It is yes in the sense that the Son of God took our humanity to himself in Jesus of Nazareth. But no in the sense that we are called to follow the example of his great humility.
So he's talking about the incarnation in the sense that...
About how it says in Philippians that God or that Jesus in the very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but rather he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant.
I like that quite a bit because I think that it cuts to, in terms of we do things like service and evangelism, our attitude shouldn't be, God save me, I'm so great. It should be, yeah, God saved me, he's made me good, and I'm going to now humble myself and come down to the level of others and help them and help pull them up so that they too can have a relationship with God.
Good.
The one thing I would say about that, it's really, really good and it's really important, but the one caution I might throw out there is make sure that you are growing in your faith. Make sure that you have somebody who's able to keep you grounded in the faith before you're just going out into the world and being incarnate and humble there. Really important. But, for example, in our last episode, we talked about tips for being in the world but not of it.
Yeah. I
won't go through those again, but I'd reference that as being really, really important for you if you're going to be living out this principle, especially if you're somebody who's called to evangelism, so that through practicing Jesus' incarnation, through humbling yourself, you don't wind up being contaminated by the world along the way.
Good.
Number 4.
We are to be like Christ in his service.
Okay.
This is self-explanatory, that he is well known for his service. And so you had mentioned earlier about moving information from your head to your heart.
Yes.
And I think John Stott's trying to take it one step further, where it moves from our heart to our hands and to our feet, and we're actually out there serving in the world, doing things for others.
Yep, and I totally agree. What I would say is let's make sure that we don't have too narrow of a definition of service. Service is whatever it is that God's calling you to do to live out your faith. That can be helping people, it can be evangelism, it can be discipleship. We all play a part as the body of Christ. Sometimes as Christians we get too narrow on what we define as service, and we start to compare that, evangelism is better than just helping the poor, or that helping the poor is the ultimate and doing discipleship isn't as good. So none of that. We need to have a broad definition that includes all the roles of the body of Christ.
That's a good point, because actually in reference to like the foot washing experience, John Stott writes that just as Jesus performed what in his culture was the work of a slave, so we are in our cultures to not regard any task too menial or degrading to undertake. So no matter what it is, just help out.
Cool. Number 3.
Number 3 is that we are to be like Christ in his love. And again, this is kind of, it seems self-explanatory, but Paul talked about how we are to live a life of love just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. I
really want to seize on that point where he talks about how Jesus gave himself for us and now we're imitating that.
Exactly.
What I think love is about in this case is God has given to you, now you give it away to others. So it's giving away what you have been given. That's a really important part of spiritual maturity.
And
Number 2,
we are to be like Christ in his patient endurance. What does this mean?
I don't know. You tell me.
Let me tell you. This has to do with this idea that Jesus suffered, he acted as a slave, but he patiently endured these different things. And in this life, we are going to be going through some different things. And as Christ followers, even more might become to us, possibly spiritually would be more of the emphasis, but just in general, we are going to deal with some bad stuff, and we are to endure.
Definitely. This is part of what I love about Jesus, is how fierce and steadfast he is. I think this is a perfect complement to love, where love is about being very gracious to others, and it's really important, but then we also need to have this fierceness in our Christianity that brings in the complementary virtues to what love brings, where love makes us gentle and accessible to other people. Fierceness helps us to stand firm on our foundation so that we're not being corrupted by the world, as we talked about before. So totally on board.
Good. And I think you're really going to like this final one.
Number 1.
Number 1 has to do with what you talked about earlier, discipleship. He says, we are to be like Christ in his mission. And so how I tie that into discipleship is Jesus had prayed before he died that as you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. And he also talked about how, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. That's what he said to his disciples. So
this one's almost a summary of all of them in some ways. That incarnation, sent into the world, service, that God has a task for us, and then to do all of that, we have to be both loving and have that firm, steadfast endurance to get through it.
Yeah, so that to me, that one really speaks to me a lot too, because both of us are really into the idea of discipling and mentoring. And,
definitely.
To know that the Great Commission is right there, not just to make people convert, but to make them into disciples.
Matt, those were fantastic points. I'm glad to stamp them with my approval by giving them the Bendy Bono Countdown on the Life Report. This has been the Bendy Bono and Matt Anderson on the Life Report. Well done, sir.
Oh, well, thank you, Ben.